So it really is a huge privilege to have these like world-class scholars join us this afternoon. So please can we give a round of applause to John and Julie.
Our event today, I'm going to be honest, I am being a little mischievous, and it's going to be a little bit of a struggle, but that's why we're here, and you're welcome. So normally when I put together a PowerPoint, there's a lot of conversations in education right now about accessibility, and that's really important. So I'm thinking about whether I'm using the different colors I'm using, I'm thinking about the font I'm using, everything to make it as accessible as possible. So if this was on a normal day, this is what I would have. Today's not a normal day. And what we have with transcription at its core is about creating access. That's what it is. And this isn't just for, this can be transcription material, that's great. Right? It's not about just access that you can't read the handwriting, maybe you can't see it at all. So many reasons to create access. So with that in mind, I know today, that's where I'm going to push you, is building that skill set. So you can create that access, and I hope you do continue to look for ways to contribute to creating access with transcriptions. So today, what we will be doing the entire time is the entire PowerPoint is going to be in secretary hand. So I'm going to be when I call on you, I was thinking about leading a review for secretary hand, and I thought, no, we're going to organically build it in, right? And this is how we're going to do it, one word at a time, and it's just practice, but I want to challenge you to think about this. Do you think, if you read this every single day, all the time, yeah, see, everyone's already started, you intuitively know you'd get better, and this would become easier. That's why you can read what you do. So, for instance, sorry, you're in the front row, this is what happens, this is great.
Reading Mary Williams.
Lovely, lovely. This enthusiasm here. So, early modern secretary hand, from what you've seen so far, does it all look the same? Why not?
Mainly because there was no standardization of handwriting or spelling in the 17th century, and just like nowadays, everybody has a different style of handwriting.
Always. Absolutely. I saw a lot of hands. Anyone else want to add to that or agree with that? I see a head nod right there.
Well, yeah, sure, I agree. And it also depends on the materials that they're physically using as well, the different types of ink, and then the different handwriting utensils as well.
Material texts the materiality is going to make a difference. And also at this time, just as a reminder, there are different hands. If you actually look into hands, and if you do not yet have, I just realized the Beinecke's new. So at this time, not only you have secretary hand, you have italic hand, you have a variety of hands that are circulating in the early modern world. People are borrowing from each other. So that's why even within the letters that you'll be seeing, this font here, which is free, and you can get on your computer and create this in Word, FYI. I can send out a link for that. This is a really, I wouldn't say pure secretary hand, but this is like a real strong secretary hand in a way that a lot of the other things you'll be looking at are going to be a mix. They're going to be, and that mix is literally called a mixed hand, a blended hand, a bastard hand, and it's going to be a combination of italic and secretary, and you're going to see that mix. But for the slides, I'm really pushing you on secretary hand. So, with that in mind, what I would like now is, I don't know any of you, and I would like to hear, what would I like to hear? Right here.
Your name. I triumph and or challenge, I think.
It is. It is. Did you agree? I saw your hand up too. Great. So I'm just going to go around. I'd like to hear, because I know you've done some work, so I want to hear where are you at as paleographers right now. I'm trying to get a read of the room in like a less aggressive testing way. Can we start right here? So without further ado, let me tell you what you're in for today. But I'm not going to read it. People here are going to read it.
Agenda, script warm-up, Kahoot tips, round 1, receipt, recipes, round 2, Mary, and run.
So this is a really tricky letter here. I'm being tough. What is this letter right there? Oh, C. That's the single stem C. So if you go to the top, can you read that top, not the top agenda, but the next one down? Can you read that one more time? Recipe warm-up.
Oh.
Yep. So, and the reason, we're bringing that up for a reason, that's not just like an idle reminder. The single stem C, that was one of the hardest, my favorite, this is a little body, but it is the 17th century. We were doing a, it was the first thing we transcribed in the class that I was learning this. And it looked like, we all said, oh, it's cork ale.
Yeah.
Except that's not an R. True story. True story. Cork ale.
We took the School of Venus before, like that's always a fun thing to start with. So we're all in for this.
I know. We're doing it.
Yeah.
So I want to start with because I started starting with recipes for. Normally, I like starting with recipes as a warm-up because A, they're gross normally, and that tends to make it easier to read because you're rewarded with something ridiculous. But also, it's important today because recipe books are often written by women. So sometimes if there's a tendency to think, oh, we don't have enough writing, manuscripts from women, it's like, well, maybe not correspondence in the 17th century, but if we start to include recipe books, that changes a lot. It changes how we see what our sources are. So when we think also about recipe books, what do you think, what do we find in these? Has anyone you done work with?
We did. We listened to the Folger piece, right? Like that was a few weeks ago, maybe 4 or 5 weeks ago. You know, they did the video. Like we watched that, and we had a little poke around on their site, but we haven't transcribed them extensively at all. Like we haven't transcribed them really at all. We just
Until right now.
Until right now.
Until right now.
This is perfect.
So tell me, what do you learn in a recipe book? Why are these really valuable sources? What are things that you can learn in a recipe book? Cooking is iffy.
It gives you like kind of more than food sometimes. Like they'll talk about, like I think one of them was like home remedies or just like kind of little makeshift things that they would do.
Yeah.
You can sort of reveal to you more about like the common people, I guess you could say, because like if you know a recipe chef something, but they're like, oh, replace blah with blah, and you'd be like, oh, then they're probably like a little poorer around this time.
Socioeconomic, you can get into these nuances, yeah.
It's like getting to know what they did and did not have, again, whether it was available to them or if maybe inside the book there was another recipe of how to make something else inside that recipe.
Mm-hmm. All together, did I say it? Yeah.
I feel like to kind of build off that a little bit, there could be notations within some of the recipes, so like slightly like what their thoughts were about the recipe, like to maybe alter it, or maybe to say like this could be used for such and such occasion, or something of that type.
All of a sudden, you're seeing all these interactions, additional notations, you're seeing change over time. And is it necessarily representing just the thoughts of one person to see a recipe written down? I'm seeing you shaking your head no.
If the recipe books were passed down mother to daughter-in-law, you'd have their comments on the recipes themselves, but also what was happening in the community. We saw one that kept track of births in the recipe book.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they're like the early Bibles of how they kept track of the marriages that were passed on.
Yeah, a lot to be learned. And I mean, I'm talking ones that definitely include food. But as people pointed out, there can also be the medicinal ones. And men absolutely are keeping these too. It's not like these are just women. But it's a wonderful source for me. And the other reason transcribing works really well is there's a natural order that makes sense to you. Add this to this, and then do this. My favorite thing I learned one time I was at the Folger for a conference, and I saw the person was going to talk about water. And I thought, okay, boy, they're letting anyone in these days, which is, rookie move on my part. And then the woman gets up and was talking about, if you pay attention to the water and recipe book, she had actually ID'd 56 different types of water. Which all of a sudden, what is that telling you? Geographically, maybe where they live. Are they getting it from a pond? Are they getting it from a stream? They even have things like recent rainwater, old rainwater. Like all of a sudden, the nuance for water, I remember thinking, well, learn my lesson. So like you can get so much from these recipe books. So today, what we're going to be doing, I'm gonna ask you, we're gonna go low tech or analog for this portion. I'm gonna ask that you work with a partner or independently if you so choose. And I want you to write out the recipe that I'm gonna put up. Hint is on the picture. And so I'm gonna ask that you use the semi-diplomatic transcription. Does anyone, if I said semi-diplomatic, is anyone with me yet? Oh.
We haven't done it.
We've not done it.
Oh, okay, so semi-diplomatic, I want to ask that you do the following things. Do not correct the spelling. Transcribe what you see. I also want you to maintain line breaks. So when you get to the end of the line on the reading, start a new line on your transcription as well. I'm also going to ask that you expand abbreviations and thorns. I think that's all I need to say. I think we're just going to let's do this.
Perfect.
Oh, I like it too. Just so many things. Yeah, I'm always, you'd be surprised, actually Rhode Island in particular, I was looking at court records and the butcher hook age. I was seeing this in the early and I was like, I thought that kind of dropped out in the 16th century. I thought that was like last year. Keep it on time. Remind me of your names again. Okay, if you have not, maybe as we go along, feel free to kind of fill in as you, like, no one's grading this. Let's actually just start to kind of do our own kind of reading in the round. And everyone, if you just read a line as I come to you, and if you don't know a word, it's okay, because we're all learning here. So choose whether or not, did anyone transcribe those last two kind of letters there? Maybe T's? Maybe X's? I don't know. I think that's interesting. I'm not sure if that's supposed to be a number. I don't know if these are Roman numerals, and so they need 2 X's would be 20? I'm not sure. Okay, so a lot of people saw broth. What if I told you that first letter is not? Let's try to find it, right? If we can't, if something seems, and sometimes it's good when I finish the transcription, I read it out loud. That's how I often catch mistakes. I'll be like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense. So with that, it could be pickle broth. I mean, that's not out of the realm of possibility. But I'm looking at that letter there, and I'm looking to see if I can find another place where I see that in. Cowcumbers. I see it here. What is that letter there? It's a W. And then what's the superscript 2 letters? So what is actually, that's not broth, but with. Right? Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. So when this is a tricky one here. What do we have? What is this word here?
Yeah. Is it use?
It is. And that's that V acting as a U, which I'll get to in just a moment. So what we see here, I think it's interesting to have that rationale. So what they're saying, what do they mean putting oil on top to keep out so it doesn't take wind? What do they mean by that?
I was just gonna say, like, if anything like gets into it, probably like won't get past the oil, so it like acts as sort of like a buffer.
Exactly. It prevents the oxidizing as this like additional barrier. Really interesting here. And there's a whole group of people that actually recreate these historical recipes. I think they have a strong stomach, but I may or may not watch them when they do videos. It's always interesting. Well done, everyone. That was your warm-up with that.
So here's what's going to happen. We have like a 20-minute break basically now. now, and then we're going to make our way over to the library. All of your posters are there. We just need to go and get them set up. I've just left 2 of my other students starting the setup process, who aren't in this class, so I just wrote in to help me. But if you can head over to the Mary Tech Wide Centre in the next 5 or 10 minutes to get a poster set up, we've got a couple of different things. I can confirm the compass is on campus. I've confirmed, I'm not
I was doing so much more work than.
And it's clear that while he was in England, Roger really missed his wife. But given her free spirit, she actually chose to stay put here in Providence. So please do go back and check out these fabulous things from Rhode Island Historical Society. So to kind of conclude my marks then, writing Mary back into the historical record is difficult. When historian Laurel Thatcher Ulrich published a really kind of obscure article in the 1970s on Puritan funerals, she didn't realize that one particular sentence that she wrote would go on to appear on t-shirts, mugs, bumper stickers, greeting cards. And she wrote, "Well-behaved women seldom make history." And like any good historian, she used this as a teachable moment and turned it into a book project. So I encourage you to check out that book. And I think this gives us something to think about for Mary, right? As a well-behaved woman, how did she make history? And was she in fact what we determine as a well-behaved woman? And this is something you'll explore as you go through the posters. So we'd originally planned to host this event in March to tie into Women's History Month, but alas, scheduling conflict and life simply just got in the way. But I think in many ways it makes more sense to host the event tonight. It's a culmination of a semester-long research project for my students on Mary. And to be honest, women's history is history. And I think it makes sense to put Mary's story front and center throughout the year rather than simply for 1 month. And I think it's particularly important actually to think about women's history when women's control over their bodies right now continues to be under threat. So it seems like a really good moment to recenter women's voices in the past. I've been studying Roger Williams for 20 years actually at this point. I wrote my undergraduate dissertation on him back in England 20 odd years ago. But really I only started to consider Mary's story just over 2 years ago when Plymouth Patuxent Museums asked me to talk about Mary for their Women's History Month. And since then I've been digging into the archival records both in England and over here in New England. And there was a newspaper article on this research a year ago, and I casually said to the reporter at the Boston Globe, I'm going to teach a class on Mary Williams and her world, not really thinking too much about it. And then they printed that, so I thought, actually best teach this class. And so thankfully I've been able to do that. And so for me it's such a wonderful privilege to see my students here from that class. So I'm not going to give a formal talk about Mary Williams and her world tonight. I'm going to actually leave it up to my students who've been studying Mary since January. Please have a look at their research posters, which include details on the historiography of women's history, Mary's time growing up in England, the role her father, Richard Bernard, played in her life, her move to Essex, her marriage to Roger, her family life here in New England, and case studies of primary sources that reveal tantalizing details about her life, such as the poverty she experienced throughout her life, such as the illness that she faced when she nearly died and Roger was away yet again, and the role she played in caring for people in the community. And my last thing to do before I let you enjoy this is to thank everybody for being here. We're so fortunate to have two leading scholars join us tonight. Firstly, we have Dr. Julie Fisher, who is at the back, visiting us, yes, from the National Archives. She's the co-author of the outstanding book, Ninigret, Sachem of the Nyantics and Narragansett, Diplomacy, War, and the Balance of Power in 17th Century New England and Indian Country. Fisher is also a leading scholar on paleography, transcriptions, and she's pioneered so many groundbreaking digital humanities projects, and she's such a talented educator. She also just published an article on Roger Williams and his Indian affairs in the New England Quarterly, so please do check that out. We're also lucky to welcome historian and archaeologist and park ranger John McNiff from the National Park Service, specifically from the Roger Williams National Memorial. John, as I said to my students earlier, I think knows more about Roger Williams than anyone I've ever met. And every time I meet him, I learn so many new things from him. He's been the co-leader of the Retracing Roger trip back to England. He's heavily involved in the Roger Williams Family Association, who we have representatives here tonight. And also, he is very good at forging signatures. When we visit places in England, he signs in as Roger Williams, and it's as though Roger Williams was there. It's brilliant. It's great. And finally then, none of this would have been possible without funding from the Office of the Provost, the Department of History and Cultural Studies, the Mary Teff White Fund through the Roger Williams University Library, event support from the Community Partnership Centre, and also support from other external organisations such as the Roger Williams Family Association. We're really grateful to Massachusetts Historical Society for sending high-resolution scans of the documents that we need, and perhaps most importantly to Rhode Island Historical Society for bringing history to life for us tonight with the original letter and compass. So thank you. Please enjoy yourself tonight, please. There are a couple of things to do. Compass and letter, obviously. Talk to my students, ask them about their work. Hang out with Park Ranger McNiff and have a go at 17th century handwriting with a quill, sealing letters and having a look at Mary's handwriting. So thank you for being here tonight. Once again, thank you all.
Have you ever used one? Okay. They did not keep the feathers all the way out here. They usually peel them. This should give you a nice sharp point. There's not a lot. You hold it in between these three fingers, and you support the rest of your hand. And your whole arm moves. You don't just move your fingers. Your whole arm moves. That's where you get the flow. You don't have to touch the paper very heavily. And the worst thing in the world is to try to go against the quill. You notice the quill there's a rounded part here and there's the open part that they've cut. If you try to go against this rounded part, it'll start to skip on the page. It likes to go like this. Okay, so any of the strokes you can make, you can make them heavier on the downstroke and then very light when you're going against that. Does that make sense?
Well done.
That's for you.
They've done a really great job. There's only one of them. So that's actually not that bad.
Practice.
I was just for anything. I just said that.
One piece of Mary Williams. Thank you. And we speculated as to what happened. So what did happen?
Yep. This out of your way. See if there's ink on it. Turn it so that the hollow point here.
You want to have a go with it?
You having fun yet?
I've been having fun with Dr. Cranston Farmer.
You just did that. It's fun. What it is when you practice something long enough, you get used to it. Now, in the class there, we were looking at the secretary hand last week. Okay, and you're trying to piece it together. You know what really helps? Actually writing. So I had done calligraphy a long time ago, and I said, it's going to be so much easier if I understand how the letters are made, how they're put on the paper. And I started doing it. I picked up a regular old quill, okay, and I started trying to write like that. And I realized there are certain things you can and can't do. You have to go back and do other things. And it's, but all of a sudden you start to understand the letters, the forms and the shapes of the letters, and they come, it's like somebody turning on a television set. The picture becomes clear on what it says. And the more time you spend with it, the easier it is. It is. And
He retired.
I know. I was like, I was just seeing him.
Yeah, but he was.
Yeah. Boards and not doing justice.
He does.
I do have to say that what I really appreciate and what is so careful about the work you're doing is, you know, it starts off, you have a sense of things, but it's not until you actually start counting and putting it in order that you really know what you have. And like, you know, it's not the most exciting work, but when you see it as a whole at the end, like it becomes very powerful. I've never seen this. I've never seen this all laid out like this.
Yes, we are.
I'll send you a story.